Okay, what's going on, everybody? We're here, we're live. I want to thank you all for joining me today. If you can see and hear me clearly, please drop a one in the live chat and then we can get today's stream started. But I'm a bit in a rush to get this breaking news off, so I might not wait for the ones to come into the live chat, but I'll give it a little bit. I'll wait for the ones to come in if you can see and hear me clearly. And while I'm waiting for the ones to come in, please hit the like button if you haven't already. That is the most important thing that you can do for me on this channel, because that helps and assists in making sure that this video goes out to those that are actually subscribed to the channel. When you hit the like button, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, and hit the bell notification next to the subscribe button so you can be notified whenever I release a new video. And lastly, please make sure you share this video out on your social media platforms as well. Now I see the ones are starting to come in, so we can get into this breaking news. Now, as many of you all know, clearly, obviously, I've been following what's been going on with Chicago as well as New York concerning concerning the migrant crisis, or as I like to say, the Biden crisis in those cities. Well, breaking news: Brandon Johnson and his allies were successfully able to stop the referendum from being able to get added to the ballot on the 2024 ballot, in which voters would have had an opportunity to make a decision on whether or not they wanted to keep Chicago as a sanctuary city. Brandon Johnson and his allies successfully were able to defeat that measure. So no, on the 2024 ballot, there will be no option for Chicagoans to actually have a voice and speak out on whether or not they want Chicago to remain a sanctuary city. Brandon Johnson and his allies successfully blocked the measure. As I stated in previous live streams, the DNC loves to fearmonger Black Americans with the thought, notion, and idea that if you allow Republicans to get back in office, oh, they're going to put you all back in chains. And then the main thing that they hit you with concerning fear mongering is voter suppression. As I've stated in the last stream, who needs voter suppression from Republicans when you have Democrats that outright dismiss their constituents altogether, particularly Black Americans who vote Democrat to the tune of 85 to 90% and have been doing so religiously since 1964? Who needs voter suppression when we just ignore our Black constituents, especially in Chicago? I'm not going to read the poll right now because I read it numerous times, but as many of you all know, the Chicago poll that was taken, in which Chicagoans were polled on whether or not they want Chicago to remain a sanctuary city, the majority of white Chicagoans said we want to keep Chicago a sanctuary city. The majority of non-white people, Black, Hispanic, and AAPI, said they did not want Chicago to remain a sanctuary city. But by leaps and bounds, Black Chicagoans were the most in favor of removing Chicago's sanctuary city status. And they were the ones leading the charge on getting this referendum on the ballot so that the voters can actually have a voice. But once again, anti-Democrats in the Democratic Party successfully blocked that measure. So what I want to do right now is I want to get into a few quick articles, and then we're going to head out of here. We're not going to be here too long at all, or at least we shouldn't be here too long. And another thing that I want to point out as well, and we're going to get to this point in the article also, but the significance in that referendum not being on the ballot and Chicagoans no longer being able to have a voice, right? No longer being able to participate in democracy as it pertains to the migrant crisis in Chicago. The significance of that is great, because had that been on the ballot, let me say this very quickly. Had that been on the ballot and Chicago actually voted to remove Chicago's sanctuary city status, that wasn't going to result in some sort of mass deportation effort, right? That's not what was going to happen. This ballot measure was largely symbolic because as a whole, Chicago, the state of Illinois, is a welcoming state, right? So there's other legal matters as well. There are other legal matters there as well. So this was largely symbolic. But there is a place for symbolism for as much as I speak against it concerning how it's weaponized against Black Americans, concerning the relationship between Black America and the Democratic Party. Clearly, there's a use for it because it works successfully against Black Americans all the time. But this time it would have had the reverse effect, because what you saw happening was this trending momentum moving forward more and more aggressively in Chicago, where you had Black Chicagoans blocking Brandon Johnson at every corner. They blocked him from being able to take a Munson Park. They blocked him from being able to take the South Shore High School. Every city council meeting that was being held concerning the migrant crisis was packed with Black Chicagoans, to which no one else was able to get a word in edgewise, in which Black Chicagoans were staunchly and sternly against Chicago being a sanctuary city. And this is a horrible, ugly look and a horrible, ugly stain on a blue city like Chicago, when you're in an election year and Biden's trying to beat Trump, and you have this vote blue no matter whose city, with all these Black Chicagoans who are supposed to mindlessly vote Democrat like they always do, being against such a key policy like the sanctuary city status of Chicago. They don't want that to be infectious and then ripple out throughout the country. That's what they're trying to stop. So it was about killing the momentum of Black Chicagoans. They successfully blocked this measure. And remember, they also changed the rules on how you're able to have access to city council hearings. It is now more difficult in the city of Chicago for Chicagoans to enter into a city council meeting than it is for illegal immigrants to cross the border into the United States. It is amazing. The irony of that is crazy, with the rule changes that were made in order for Chicagoans to actually get into a city council meeting. Once again, it's about killing momentum, because if you go back now and you watch videos concerning the city council hearing that happened today about the Chicago sanctuary city status, it is not packed with Black Chicagoans as it normally would be. Every meeting prior to today was packed with Black Chicagoans from wall to wall. When you look at it now, because they have a thorough vetting process where minimal people are allowed on the second floor to speak unless you've been vetted, you see a handful of chairs behind the city councilman, everyone's sitting there quiet. And unlike the normal circumstances during a city council hearing about the migrant crisis, where it was all Black Chicagoans from wall to wall, there were some Black Chicagoans there, but there was a whole lot of non-Black people there as well. Surprise, surprise, in favor of making Chicago, or keeping Chicago, a sanctuary city. I don't think any of us are surprised by that, because that was the look that they were going for when they put in place the new rules concerning how to enter in a city council meeting in Chicago. If you're just a member of the general public, you either have to be personally invited by a local official, you have to be a child or children on a field trip, or you have to put in your request via the email, in which from that point you will be vetted, and you need an ID to get into the city council meeting. Once again, the irony and the nonsense of all of this. So in Chicago, a Democrat city, you need to do all this and have your ID to enter a city council meeting. But this is the same Democratic Party that told you it was racist for Republicans to implement that you need an ID to vote. So you don't need an ID to vote, but you need an ID to get into a city council meeting. Make that make sense. It doesn't. It doesn't. This was all about silencing the voices of Black Chicagoans who are leading the charge in this effort to end Chicago's sanctuary city status. So now that I've gotten all that out of my system, let's get into some of these articles really quickly, and then we're going to head on out of here, okay? There are 257 of you all in the stream right now. Please hit the like button if you haven't already. Smash that like button and share this video out on your social media platform. So let's jump into this. This comes from Chicago 5 NBC. As you can see on the top, this happened about an hour ago, maybe a little over an hour ago, that this news broke. So let's jump into this right now very quickly. Once again, Chicago City Council has voted against a measure that would have asked voters next year if they believe the city should maintain its sanctuary status as a sanctuary city or as a welcoming city amid an ongoing migrant crisis. The council voted 31-16 against the measure during a special meeting Thursday. I'll read that again. The council voted 31-16 against the measure during a special meeting on Thursday following weeks of heated debates. The topic led to tense exchanges, chaos, and protests on the chamber floor and accusations of misconduct in recent weeks. Several members of the city council had called for a referendum to be placed on the March ballot to determine whether Chicago should remain a sanctuary city, a status that has been in place since 1985. At issue at issue is how to continue financing shelters and other essentials for more than 20,000 migrants my apologies. At issue is how to continue financing shelters and other essentials for more than 20,000 migrants that have arrived in the city in the last 14 months. This is a direct quote from Ray Lopez, one of the aldermen who were in support of having the measure on the ballot. He stated, I think it's absolutely imperative we give voters the opportunity to have their view on this subject heard, especially when we are talking about spending $255 million this year alone to take care of 20,000 migrants, Lopez says. And I agreed with Raymond Lopez on that statement. Chicagoans should have been able to have their voices heard. Let's jump into this next article here from WGN. And it reads as such: City Council gathered for a special meeting Thursday, which was today, obviously, to discuss Chicago's status as a sanctuary city, and decided to repeal the referendum considering Chicago a welcoming city. The older people involved in the initial consideration wanted to give power to voters, as they should want to do that. I'll read that again. The older people involved in the initial consideration wanted to give power to voters and allow them to decide if Chicago should remain a welcoming city, which they should have been able to decide. Here's a direct quote from Anthony Beale during the city council meeting. Anthony Beale, who has been 10 toes down this entire ordeal. I have to just quickly, once again, give my proper salutes to Anthony Beale. Anthony Beale has been 10 toes down this entire ordeal concerning the migrant crisis in Chicago. He has been a stand-up brother this whole time, being a perfect representation of what it is for an alderman and for a politician to actually represent his constituents the right way. He has been the perfect example of that. So I can't give him a round of applause enough for how much of a stand-up brother that he's been. But let's get back into the direct quote that came from Anthony Beale during today's city council meeting, right? Anthony Beale said, "It is a shame that you are all scared. What are you scared of? To let people have a voice? What are you scared of? The truth?" And that's exactly what they're scared of. Anthony Beale is spot on. What they are scared of in Chicago is the truth coming out. Like, once again, the momentum would have been crazy moving forward for Black Chicago to would have been able to get that on the ballot, voted the measure away. So now Chicago is technically no longer a sanctuary city. From that point on, the kind of pressure and the kind of energy that those in the city would have been moving with would have possibly been way too much for Brandon Johnson to handle in order to execute his plans that are being handed down to him by the DNC. And that may have been, and that may have sparked, that could have sparked into something that could have been infectious throughout the country. It's about making sure Black Americans maintain their programming of just simply voting blue no matter who and ask no questions. Don't worry about the fact that you've been doing this since 1964 religiously and it hasn't resulted in any significant changes. Just keep doing it anyway. Don't break your programming. And that's what this was all about. It was making sure that their programming was not being broken and that this infectious, you can say, revolutionary spirit did not spread throughout the country amongst other Black Americans. Okay, so let's get back into this article and we're almost going to wrap this up. The majority of people who attended the meeting, pay attention now, because this is, remember what I stated earlier, and as we all have seen, as we followed along with this saga, right? As it has unfolded, every city council meeting that has taken place concerning the migrant crisis, the second floor and even the third floor was always wall to wall packed with overwhelming majority Black Americans against Chicago sanctuary city status. But now, with the new rules in place, let's see who actually attended this time with the new rules in place. Watch this. Look at your man, Brandon Johnson, with his anti-democratic self. The majority of people who attended the meeting were in support of not reconsidering Chicago's sanctuary city status. I'll read that again. The majority of people who attended the meeting were in support of not reconsidering Chicago's sanctuary city status. Therefore, the sanctuary city referendum question will not be on the March ballot, on the March primary ballot. The majority of the people, it made it that much easier. It made it that much easier for the aldermen to vote against the measure with good conscience, not having a bunch of Black Americans holding them to task and calling them out for the sellouts and the snakes that they are. They didn't have that on their back this time. That is not who showed up this time. This time, they had a good, orderly bunch of people, the majority of whom, surprise, surprise, with the new rules put in place, were in favor of keeping Chicago's sanctuary city status. And with those good boys and good girls there who were largely in favor of keeping Chicago's sanctuary city status in place, that allowed the older people, the aldermen, to not have their conscience seared. This is what I'm looking for, to not have their conscience seared as they voted against the referendum. Wow. That you got to thank Brandon Johnson for being as anti-democratic as it comes, just as anti-democratic as it comes. And look at this part down here. Look at this part down here. I'm not going to read this piece in blue. Look what I have here in purple. This is just sickening. Here's a direct quote. They brought the Black pastors out, ladies and gentlemen. Lord have mercy. They brought the Black pastors out. And once again, this is how you know. This is what makes it so obvious that all of this was about being against and silencing the voice of Black Chicagoans. Because why do you keep bringing the Black pastors out? Why do you keep bringing the NAACP out? Why do you keep doing that if this isn't a Black Chicagoans versus Brandon Johnson thing, if this isn't a Black Chicagoans against the migrant crisis thing? Why do you keep bringing out Black pastors and NAACP? This makes it very obvious that this was about silencing the voice of Black Chicago, not as much as it was about the city as a whole, but mainly about Black Chicago. But let's listen to what this Black pastor had to say. Lord have mercy. And I'll show you who he is right here. His name is Pastor Javon Dion. This is Pastor Javon Dion. And here's what he had to say. This is not a fight of them versus us, but this is a fight for morality, a fight for doing what's right, and a fight for doing what is just. Pastor Javon Moore stated. And this is him once again, Pastor Javon Dion Moore. That's his full name, Pastor Javon Dion Moore, or Reverend Javon D. Moore. I just can't with the pastors. I just can't with the way that they allow themselves to be pawns within the DNC. It drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. And it, once again, it just makes it so obvious what this is all really about. It makes it all so obvious what this is truly about. And I'm going to say and point out this last thing in closing. Um, I'm not going to read the rest of this here. It's really, there have been several attempts to, it's irrelevant. I'm not going to read this last thing here. What I do want to point out here in closing is this, though, as we close this out, because this is very important. And this is even almost more so a personal thing to me, right, as well. I don't ever want to hear anyone bring up Jeanette Taylor's name to me ever again. Jeanette Taylor is an older woman in Chicago who got somewhat, you could say, famous, or at least within the Black community and on the internet, right? You know, on Black YouTube, when she stood up to Lori Lightfoot and she got all in her face and was screaming down on Lori Lightfoot. And there's this image that is online that you can look up if you look up Jeanette Taylor and Lori Lightfoot, where she's just screaming down on her. And from that point on, she carried this reputation of being a stand-up person for the Black community and fighting for Black Chicago. And she comes from community activism and so on and so forth. And in between that time and the beginning of this migrant crisis, I honestly never heard a bad word about her. Didn't know much about her. But from that moment that she had with Lori Lightfoot, I only heard relatively good things about her. Since this migrant crisis started, she has folded and abandoned Black Chicago at every opportunity present. Whereas you have someone like Anthony Beale, who has stood 10 toes down at every opportunity present and even spearheading the charge to eliminate Chicago's sanctuary city status, as well as attempt to frustrate efforts on funding the migrant crisis to the degree that it has been funded in Chicago, because he says you are all not funding the citizens of this city the way that you're funding the so-called migrants. So if you're not going to fund the citizens this way, then in good conscience, he cannot vote in favor of any of the measures that are bringing hundreds of millions of dollars to the migrant crisis. And he has stood 10 toes down on every one of those points each time they come up. Jeanette Taylor has always done the exact opposite. And here she goes again. You're gonna see a brief list, and you all know how I struggle to read names. So forgive me, but I'm going to read these names off, and I'm going to read the names of the people who actually voted against Chicago sanctuary city status. And you let me know if Jeanette Taylor comes up. Maybe I missed it. It's a possibility. Maybe I did. But in closing, let's do this very quickly. So besides the three who forced a special meeting, aldermen in support of considering the resolution were Brian Hopkins, Gregory Mitchell, Nicole Lee, Marty Quinn, Derek Curtis, Ronnie Mosley, Sylvana Tabarez, Monique Scott, Chris Taliaferro. Shout out to Chris Taliaferro. He is the alderman of the Munson Park neighborhood with the whole Munson Park fiasco. He is the alderman of that neighborhood and of that area, and he voted for having the referendum on the ballot. So shout out to him for staying 10 toes down on this matter as well. Shout out to Christopher Taliaferro, if I'm saying his last name correctly. But let's carry on, right? Christopher Taliaferro, Nicholas Spasato, Anthony Napolitano, Brendan Riley, and James Gardner. Did you all hear anywhere on this list Jeanette Taylor? No, you did not. You didn't hear Jeanette Taylor's name on this list anywhere. Please never, ever, ever bring up Jeanette Taylor's name to me again. Never. I may bring her name up to keep exposing how much of a fraud she is and how she cosplays the whole Black empowerment. I'm for Black Chicago. I'm fighting for the people. What about Black people? I'm fighting for us. No, she is not. She has folded every opportunity that has presented himself versus an Anthony Beal who has consistently stood 10 toes down. And with all that being said, that does it for today's stream. Breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. Brandon Johnson and his allies, which consists of Jeanette Taylor, were successfully able to silence the voices of Black Chicagoans who were leading the charge on eliminating Chicago's sanctuary city status. They were successful in standing in the way of democracy. Remember, the Republicans, I'll play it because I know how much some of you all like it, right? The Republicans, they're the ones that's supposed to be putting
They're going to put y'all back in chains. They're going to put y'all back in chains.
It's the Republicans that are supposed to be putting y'all back in chains, right? But as you consistently see, it's the Democrats who consistently find a way to effectively silence you without having to put you back in chains. Interesting how that works. Very interesting. Very interesting. So once again, that does it for today's stream. Thank you all for joining me today. If you haven't already, please hit the like button on your way out, and I will catch you all very, very soon. More than likely, there'll be another live stream tomorrow. So once again, hit the like button, share this video on your social media platforms, and hit the like button. Peace. You all have a great afternoon. Catch you guys later.